Welcome to Fraud Expose. I'm your host, Laurie Maddock, and today I'm going to be speaking with cyber fraud experts about imposter scams. Win, let's start with you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Win. I'm a founder of Cyber Armor.
Okay, Jared.
Hi, I'm Jared Zarmbinski. I'm a fraud investigator and financial crimes investigator for a bank.
Great. Well, we're here because if you as a listener, if you want to avoid fraud or know what to do if you've been a victim, you're going to stay with us so you don't get ripped off and defrauded. So let me start. Jared, what is an imposter scam? That's what we're going to talk about today, imposter scams.
Sure. Well, an imposter scam is essentially anytime there's a scam that involves someone falsifying their association or agency, meaning that, you know, whether it's usually a trusted entity that the victim uses. So, for example, PayPal, payment systems like that, online retail, or subscription merchants such as Amazon, Apple, any kind of company that offers services to customers typically, but it's not just businesses. It can also be people that impersonate other people too. Sometimes it can just be someone that's impersonating a personal friend of yours in order to gain trust and then gain your money and finances as well. So the imposter scam is essentially just someone pretending to be somebody else, using to exploit those known relationships of that person or business entity, and that trust that's kind of already been established between those as a result of that established relationship in order to gain financially.
Right. Right. And before the show, we were talking how in 2009, back on Facebook Messenger, I had that happen, and the person was so convincing, that was supposed to be my friend in a foreign country, beaten up, needed money, whatever. Like I said, in the end, I texted my friend, and it turned out, oh no, he was home in California, and I said, go to your Facebook. And apparently this hacker had gotten in and tried to do this. He familiarized himself with all the people he was trying to get the money from by pretending to be this guy. So at least we were able to figure that part out, but unbelievable. How do people get caught up in imposter scams? I mean, is it because they want to believe, or the imposters are just so convincing?
I think it's both, and I think one of the main problem is we as a human we can have a tendency to trust very easily, right? So if someone like my parents, my dad, for example, if someone call him randomly, he can talk with them for hours, right? So and that's the scariest thing ever. And now with the technologies like Facebook, you can impersonate a person very easily and pretend to be that person to, attack their family member from that standpoint. So yeah, trust is an issue. So you need to be a little bit paranoid.
Okay. Well, Jared, what kind of red flags should people watch out for?
Sure. Well, and that kind of goes along a little bit hand in hand with the same question that you asked, Glenn. And just to add on to what he said too, and kind of segue into that, there's a good amount of red flags. You know, Working in the financial industry, I can say that imposter scams, the way that we deal with them, largely come in the form of people impersonating customer service reps for these companies that I gave examples of, earlier. And part of that will be that they already know this person is a client of that organization, right? They already know that
Right.
first. And so they'll have their name, they'll call their number. They'll usually use phone number spoofing to make the number that they're calling from appear on the victim's caller ID as that company or as that friend or family member's phone number. So they'll use techniques like that. And so these aren't really red flags that you would notice as a victim, but just this is how easily, it can happen. Moving on from that, another aspect that we deal with, with banks is usually when you speak to a bank, when you call them, or, any kind of company that you have a business relationship with or an account with, many times two-factor authentication is used, especially nowadays. And that has been a great development, of course, the use of two-factor authentication being widespreadly adopted in both the financial industry and amongst many industries. However, that over the phone code, that OTP code that's sent via text or email, you know, if you give that code out, you're essentially giving access to your online customer profile to you don't know who, in this case, when it's one of these scams. And so usually that trust is gained initially by them identifying themselves, really sounding officially like a representative of that company, or really sounding like your friend, you know, through use of voice augmentation, AI, prior recordings of your friend that they clip together, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And you know, and then once they kind of, you know, come across as such, they say, I'm going to send a code to you, and you get a code actually texted to your phone or email. Well, that was actually from that company that you do business with. It was them requesting it on another device, and
Right.
then asking you because the company is going to send that code to whatever email or phone number they have on file, and that will be your email or phone. And so, but they'll time it just right. And usually, one of the ways that we can pick up on that is that there's a delay in receiving that code. And when that person says, "Hey, I'm going to send you a code," you know, if it doesn't pop up like within a matter of just a few seconds, like I would say that's one red flag to be aware of, is kind of any delays, any kind of oddness about that. Be really mindful of any kind of background noise or anything in the background. Um, you know, be aware of any kind of just odd ways of speaking that might just not sound like your buddy or your friend or the customer service person that you spoke to last at the company or bank, depending on the
Right.
situation, of course. You know, usually at that point, you know, another red flag is to also just use skepticism when it comes to what they're asking you about, or what the circumstances are behind the phone call or the contact in the first place, right? So usually, you know, I can say in banks, a lot of the time, imposter scams will be someone calling, claiming to be a fraud, you know, analyst, saying, "Hey, we have these fictitious charges on your account," or
Yeah.
Amazon, "Hey, did you buy all this stuff on Prime?" Like, and they just make up complete, just off the top of their head stuff that, of course, you don't recognize. So you say, "No, I don't recognize that." They say, "Okay, well, don't worry. We're going to protect your account. We're going to do this. We're going to do that." And that's also something to gain their trust, because then it sounds like, "Oh, okay, they're going to take care of this." Like, wow, I guess this really happened to me, you know, and the person's already thinking like a victim. They're already wanting to go ahead and receive whatever help that they're given by the perpetrator. So yeah, just trying to be aware of how that all works. And I would say that the red flags are just kind of any signs of how that's being a little too compelling. If at any point you're just a little worried, or, you know, to Gwen's point, you know, being paranoid, a big thing I would recommend to people is just to call back. You know, if you don't normally get calls like that from that company,
Right.
which is usually the case, just hang up, call them back on the number that you know is their number from prior statements, prior
Yes.
paperwork, prior official communications with them. Don't try Googling phone numbers and just calling whatever number comes up on the internet. That's another way that people use phishing to also commit these imposter type of scams. So yeah, definitely utilizing all of that awareness, and you know, recognizing those tactics, and those red flags should be beneficial to folks to avoid this.
Right. That's a good example. And when, you know, it makes me think of when I used to sell on Facebook Marketplace, I stopped selling anything that was not to be picked up locally, because what I found was they would all of a sudden want my phone number, and then, you know, they want to take the transaction out of Facebook, and then they would you know, say, I'm going to text you and you need to give me the Google number. And I'm thinking, well, why? Do you want to explain a little bit about how that works?
Um, sorry. Can you repeat?
Yeah, sure. So I stopped selling on Facebook Marketplace,
Yeah,
where I had to ship because I got ripped off too many times.
yeah.
And when they first started, I don't know, a few years ago when it really got heavy duty, I would get people who would try to take me out of Facebook Messenger, out
Yeah.
of the transaction, out of there. But they would say, "Well, let me have your phone number," and then they would say, "I'm gonna send you a Google number. Can you read it to me?" And I'm thinking, well, why would they want me to read them the number if they're asking me for that? So, can
Hmm.
you kind of explain that Facebook Marketplace scam?
Yeah. For that situation, I think their attack might be something else, not the specific to the post that you make, or um, the item that you try to sell, but they might be try to um, gather the information. I think they might be learning from you already on trying to take over one of the account, like what John mentioned with the OTP, for example. So
Okay.
in that situation, one scenario I think potentially might happen is they attempt to log into your Facebook, right? And they once they log in, they send the OTP to your phone number, and if you read that back to them, or the Google send you the OTP, and once you send it back to them, they will be able to successfully taken over the account. So,
I gotcha. What you guys talk about, it's scary to the point for a person like me who's not a
mhm,
cyber fraud expert
yeah,
to go, I'm scared of everything. If I get mail at the UPS store and I get a text, I usually can tell when it really is, but sometimes I can't. But it's gotten to the point where I refuse to click on any links. If
yeah,
it says it's from the drugstore, I call the drugstore. I don't touch any links.
yeah,
I'm afraid to send mail out, because they might get my check on the rare occasion I do that and wash the check. Then you have to worry about doing all of the Cash App and the Venmo and the PayPal. So it's like you have to be paranoid at this point because
yes.
these people are so good at it. So I mean, you guys both, what should someone do if you're a victim? I'm assuming, you would go to the police and report it. We've talked before, if the FBI, if it's a big online monetary transaction, you can do the IC3.gov form. But I think people should be paranoid at this point, right? Because
Mhm,
this is why I read all these stories about how, you're talking about the phone spoofing, and that happened again recently to someone locally here. And I think they had written, oh wait, they had written a check for $45, and someone washed the check and wrote it out for 45,000, and the bank refused to give them back the money. And the
mhm,
whole thing is the bank, under the Electronic Funds Act, is liable to return it. First off, these people didn't have 45,000 in their account. And wouldn't you think that the algorithm would say, hey, for this particular, couple, these people write small checks. Now all of a sudden there's a check for 45,000. So I don't know if you or Jared wants to answer that, but
Sure, yeah.
how do you stop that? How do you stop that when it's not part of the normal way that they do business?
Well, in that example that you gave specifically, and I don't know all the specifics to it, of course, but there probably is a little bit more to the story. But situations like that, I mean, yeah, typically, the customer shouldn't be held liable for things when it comes to overt acts of fraud, such as, an altered fictitious check item, as you described. But at the same time, it sounds like, I don't know what bank that was, but the internal controls, their
yeah,
ways of verifying the decision making involved in all that, it sounds like that didn't work out too well in that decision making process in that specific case. Having said that, I know that there's a lot of banks now that are investing a lot of extra resources into specialized teams within their fraud groups, and for the purpose of the customer experience, for the purpose of ensuring that these decisions get made correctly and are not just, being painted with a broad brush, or being made by computer systems to just log people out, block people, close people's accounts, and banking relationships whatsoever, just arbitrarily, seemingly. There has been a big push for fraud to kind of move into an area where it's also really taking into account a lot more of the considerations of the customer experience. So I want to say that as well first. Um, and you might have to repeat the rest of your question to me as I got off topic.
No, that's pretty much on topic. I mean, we're looking for what do you look out for? What do you
Yeah,
do if
as
you
far as
think you're a victim?
monitoring, yeah,
Yeah,
as far as monitoring and then things that the victims can do, of course. You definitely, as an organization, want to have an effective list of controls in place and effective ways to identify this. Really, giving awareness to your consumers is best. Describing to them the way in which an imposter scam can be carried out, much like how we've described their methods and tactics in today's conversation, is one of the biggest ways that you can just make people that would be potential victims aware of this so that they can recognize those telltale signs and back out of the situation before it makes them a victim. Once they are a victim, the typical ways of going about explaining that and to the police or to the financial institution or the services institution, the retail institution, whatever the case might be. If it involves a friend or an individual to individual, person to person type situation, definitely having both of those folks, make statements to the police would be very beneficial in that regard. Um, as far as the liability goes with, recovering funds, banks do go to pretty good efforts to do their best to recover funds. And sometimes, you can't recover everything for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it's just gone too quick or depending on the transaction type, et cetera. But a recovery process is usually a big part of the bank's investigation into any of these types of situations. Having said that, to go back to the OTP code and things of that nature where you're giving access to your online profile, that's really where, for most banks and most organizations, that's where the liability line is. And so it's really important for people to understand that they really need to treat that code like their PIN number, that over the phone
yes,
code sent to them. You give that out to the wrong person, even if you didn't mean to, you're giving access to your online profile away. And what people don't read in the fine print of their, and nobody really reads it, to be honest,
right. I read it.
but in your
I
account
read,
holder agreement and I'm again, this is just generally with
right.
most, it's different from bank to bank and company to company. But having said that, they all make you sign these, like, long things with fine print. Well, usually in the fine print, if you give access to somebody else, you're responsible for whatever happens next.
Even if
And
you were
so,
spoofed, even if you were
well,
spoofed on the phone, though, then that's
and
disturbing
that's
to
why
me.
the
So,
spoofing is important for people to be aware of, because people fall for it. Like, they really thought that really was that company or their bank or their buddy, and maybe it
right.
even sounded really like them, and then the questioning process was really similar. So that's why, a lot of, companies won't contact their customers under such circumstances. And so if it is a strange phone call, you really want to run it by your relationship as you understand it, based on your historical relationship with this company or this individual, depending on the situation, and really think for a moment, like, is this really what they would ask me? Is this consistent with our,
Yes.
how they would go about this? Okay, well, why don't you guys send this in writing? You usually send it in writing. Or, well, why didn't you tell me this when I saw you yesterday at lunch, if it's a person, like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly
so
right.
it's a lot of stuff to consider, but I think just people just need to slow down and take extra time to really, trust, but verify, like, really run it against your known understanding of interactions with that person or entity, and that should help you not be a victim. Once you are a victim, really just cooperating with all the investigations. The banks have their own investigators, cooperating with their investigation, try to take as much screenshots, give as much information as possible. Just your willingness to cooperate, as well as your police report to law enforcement, as well as all your statements, all the information that you provide. That's all really paramount. And in many cases, that's all you can do anyway as a victim once it's gone to that point. And so I would just advise people to just cooperate and try to do what you can to get everything in writing, try to take screenshots, get down all the evidence as possible and provide that to both the bank and law enforcement. And then after that, that should at least help things go smoothly in terms of the investigation, but also show that, you really are a victim. You didn't mean for this to happen. And in some cases, banks will reimburse, customers for those types of situations. And it really just kind of depends on a case by case basis with all that.
Gotcha. Before we close, I'm going to ask Win one question though. So, is there a way for banks to, let's just say, for example, we'll use me. Let's just say I don't normally make any transactions over $200. Is there a way per customer or the customer to put something in to trigger it? For example, like with my credit cards, every transaction over zero point zero 0.01, one penny, I get
Mhm,
an email. So I know right
mhm,
away if there's fraud or not. Can that same kind of service work? So say, for example, we use the $45 check and someone washed it,
mhm,
made it 45,000. Is there a way for the banks to allow customers to go in and put that in their portal and say, hey, and I'll just give you, I'm kind of backwards of most people. So I know next week I have a big transaction that I have to do, bigger than I normally do, but it's through my credit card. So what I'm actually going to do the day before is I'm going to call my credit card company and I'm going to tell them, hey, I'm going to make a transaction for X amount of dollars. That way you don't think it's a fraudulent account.
mhm,
But is there a way for banks to do that individually or for people to do that individually now, or is it
mhm,
something that's possible?
So from my experience, I had talked to a few banks, and from what I understand and know, there are many a few banks out there that using implement those type of monitor in place. So they will alert you when there's a potential fraudulent activity of a threshold, right? They also look at your behavior of spending. So when you
Okay.
spending, where you spending, if you go, like you're primary spending on Amazon, and one day you're spending on in China, one of the store in China, they would reflect that right away and alert you. So many of the banks do have that feature that they're implementing. So I think it's going to be better over time. Um, but for me personally, what I do to protect myself is in most of my banks, I enable notification of every transaction I make
Yes.
and send it to my email and to my phone. So when I make that charge, I know exactly I'm the one that doing it.
And
Any
you can set
time that,
thresholds too. You can set your own thresholds too,
yeah,
independent of the bank's
yeah,
threshold.
depend on the bank,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, I think use those type of feature, and just alert you every time that you spend, and that's where you're always on top
Yeah.
of your account.
Yeah, I think a lot of seniors, like in my family, I could think of one, but they're afraid. They're afraid of any of online banking that if they have
Mhm,
on, and I'm like, no, that's how you know what's what's going on is if you have the online banking, you kind of get alerted to the fraud early enough. So, but I think seniors because they're afraid of technology. I
mhm,
mean, listen, I'm a senior. I'm not afraid of technology. I just don't feel comfortable with certain things. But when you
mhm,
have people in their 70s and 80s, they don't even realize, hey, they can do this because they're afraid to put the portal up. But you know
yeah,
what? They can go into their bank, right? And they can say, hey, I'm afraid to do this myself. Can you
Yeah.
help me set this up so that I get notified of every transaction? And that way it would stop, correct?
Yeah.
They'd have something telling them that there's something wrong. So
Definitely.
great conversation, guys. I want to thank you both for being here. We're going to see you again soon. Thanks for joining us on Fraud Expose.